Clara stood there, checkbook in hand, $25,000 staring back at her. It wasn't just money, it was the price of her family's pride, a bill she never agreed to pay. Her Uncle Silas, cold and dismissive, had forced her into this corner, his ego pushing her to the brink. And there beside him, her cousin Beatrice with a grin that cut deeper than any knife, all while Clara's hands trembled with the weight of it all. She'd spent her life trying to buy into this family's world, working, sacrificing, hoping that one day they'd see her for more than just the spare part they kept around. But it never came. Instead, she stood frozen, trapped in a game she never chose, paying for their vanity with her own future. The ink on that check may have looked black, but to Clara it felt like blood drained from her life savings, her dreams, her freedom. This was the price of being used, and it was about to cost her everything. Abuse in Clara's world didn't come in grand explosions. It wasn't always a slap or a harsh word. It came in whispers and forgotten birthdays, and small demands, and the casual dismissal of her worth. At first, it was the little things. A comment about how her dress didn't quite measure up to the latest fashion, as if her self-esteem could be cracked by something so shallow. Or the way they laughed when she spoke up, as if her opinions were worth less than the air they breathed. Over time, it wore her down. She wasn't just Clara anymore. She was the one they called when something needed fixing, when their ranch's animals had to be patched up when the plumbing broke, or when they needed someone to take care of the mess they'd made. She became the servant in their eyes, not a daughter, not a niece, not even a person. Just the resource they kept around to make their lives easier. Clara had always worked hard. She had dreams of her own dreams that didn't involve being anyone's tool or having her worth measured by the depth of her pockets. She studied hard, graduated at the top of her class, became a licensed veterinarian. Yet despite all of that, she was the one who cleaned up after their messes. No one ever asked her how she felt. No one cared if she was tired or if her heart was breaking. The demands kept coming, and she learned early on that to resist them would only bring more pain. So she stopped resisting. The cruelty wasn't just about the tasks they assigned her. It was the way they made her feel invisible, like nothing more than an extension of their will. They knew just how to break her spirit without ever lifting a finger. They didn't need to shout to make her feel small. The way they ignored her in favor of their own desires was enough. The way they never thought to thank her, never asked her if she was okay, never even looked at her unless they needed something. The silence in the room when she walked in, the way her presence went unnoticed, unless she was being called upon to fix something, was a form of abuse that gnawed at her soul. It became a part of her life, this constant neglect. Clara had learned to keep her head down, to keep her mouth shut. She learned that silence was safety, that if she just played along, just did as they asked without question, maybe, just maybe they would stop treating her like a tool. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. She knew that silence never made anything better. It only made the pain easier to ignore. Over the years, she had become numb to their subtle cruelty. It wasn't just the physical labor that wore her down, though there was plenty of that too. It was the emotional toll, the slow, constant reminder that she was less than them. Silas, her uncle with his airs of superiority and his deep pockets, never looked at her with anything but disdain. To him, she was just a means to an end, a warm body to throw money at when things went wrong. He'd never once considered her feelings, never once thanked her for all the years she spent trying to patch up the damage his reckless decisions had caused. And Aunt Mary, with her cool, calculating gaze, was no better. She saw Clara as nothing more than the hired help, someone who owed them her loyalty simply because they provided a roof over her head. A roof that came with strings, attached of course. Strings that pulled tighter with every passing year. It was the way they took everything from her without asking for her consent. It was the way they would throw her into situations that made her feel small, worthless, like she was just a pawn in their game of power. And all the while they told her that she should be grateful. Grateful for the roof over her head, grateful for the food they put on her plate, as though her very existence was something they were gracious enough to allow. They never stopped to consider that Clara had given everything she had for them. Every ounce of her energy, every minute of her life, every part of her soul had been poured into keeping their world running smoothly. But to them, she wasn't worthy of recognition, of respect, or of love. She was the servant they had trained to obey without question, and that was enough. When Clara looked back, she realized that it wasn't just that they were treating her poorly. It was that they didn't see anything wrong with it. Silas had never once apologized for making her clean up after his failures, for forcing her to buy a prize bull to fuel his ego. To him, it wasn't a betrayal, it was business. Aunt Mary had never once questioned how much she was asking Clara to sacrifice. To her, it was simply the way things worked. They were the ones in charge, and Clara was the one who was supposed to pay the price. The cruelty had been normalized over the years until Clara didn't even know what it was like to be treated with kindness. It had become so ingrained in their family dynamic that they didn't even recognize it anymore. They had twisted Clara's sense of self so deeply that she began to believe this was all she was good for. A servant, a tool, a nothing. In a way, Clara had come to expect it. She had learned not to fight back because she knew that pushing against their cruelty only made it worse. It was easier to accept her role, to bury her pain and her hopes, than to face the reality that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be able to earn their love or respect. She had become a ghost in her own life, walking through the motions, always putting their needs above her own. And so she kept quiet. She kept working. She kept hoping that maybe, just maybe one day, they would see her for something more. But the years had taught her that hope was just another form of pain. And so she kept quiet and kept going until she couldn't anymore. Clara had spent years walking this thin line, balancing between the person she longed to be and the role her family had created for her. She had become so accustomed to their cruelty, to their manipulation, that it no longer felt like a shock. Instead, it was like a slow drip, a constant pressure that she had learned to live with, even if it was slowly suffocating her. But that night at the auction, as she stood there, checkbook in hand, watching her family cheer over something they had no right to claim, something inside her started to shift. She had always thought that if she just kept her head down, kept working, kept giving them what they wanted, things would change. Maybe they'd notice her sacrifice. Maybe they'd see that she was more than just the one who fixed things. But as she watched Silas's smug face, her cousin, Beatrice's laughter echoing through the room, she realized that no matter how much she gave it, would never be enough. The truth settled on her like a heavy weight. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about love or loyalty. This was about control. And she had been a pawn in their game for far too long. The check she was holding wasn't just money. It was her life, her future, all being spent to feed their egos, to prove to the world that they were above everyone else. She'd always believed that if she just kept working, just kept obeying, maybe they would come to see her. But the reality was that they never saw her, not truly, not for who she was or what she had to offer. She was just the one who cleaned up after their messes, the one who filled in the gaps when they fell short. And tonight, she was the one being forced to buy back a piece of her father's legacy. The bull wasn't just an animal to her, it was a symbol, a reminder that even the things she loved were being taken from her by the family she had sacrificed everything for. As she handed over the check, her hands trembling, she felt a knot form in her chest. She had spent so much of her life trying to please them, trying to earn their respect, their love, that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up for herself. But in that moment, something snapped. The realization that she had been trapped in this cycle, this never-ending loop of giving without receiving, hit her like a slap in the face. The bull trapped in that trailer was her. It wasn't just the animal that was being caged. It was her too. She had spent years confined by their expectations, by their demands, by their manipulation. But now, as the cool night air hit her skin and the sounds of her family's laughter echoed from above, she felt a coldness inside her, a sense of clarity that had been absent for so long. She reached out to touch the bull's flank, feeling the heat of its body, its raw power. It was scared, just like her. It was trapped, just like her. And for the first time, Clara understood. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a tool to be used. She was more than that. The bull wasn't just a piece of property to be bought and sold, and neither was she. She had allowed herself to be trapped, to be defined by their cruelty, but it didn't have to be that way anymore. The sound of Silas's laughter echoed from the luxury viewing box above her, and Clara's heart clenched. He thought she was just a checkbook. He thought she was just there to make sure his ridiculous investment was comfortable. But in that moment, she realized something crucial. He was wrong. She was not a tool. She was not a servant. And she was done being quiet. The fear that had lived in her chest for years began to harden, turning into something else. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anger. It was the anger of someone who had been pushed too far, someone who had spent her whole life tiptoeing around everyone's needs and had been left with nothing. She wasn't going to stand by and let them destroy her anymore. She wasn't going to keep allowing herself to be a pawn in their game. Clara knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew the consequences of standing up to them would be huge. Her family wasn't the type to just let things go. But in that moment, she made a choice. She was done being their victim. She was done playing by their rules. She had a future of her own to build, and it wasn't going to be shaped by their cruelty any longer. As she stood there, the cold night air surrounding her, Clara knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers. The first step had been taken. She wasn't just a veterinarian, a servant, or a pawn anymore. She was a woman who had finally woken up, who had finally found the strength to break free from the family that had used her. And in that moment, Clara felt a power surge through her, a quiet but unstoppable force that told her this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Clara had barely managed to make sense of her anger when the voice of her grandmother Eleanor cut through the tension like a blade. It wasn't loud or commanding, but it was sharp, clear enough to stop everyone in their tracks. Eleanor had been a ghost in the house for years, fading into the background as Silas ran things his way. But tonight, she was something else entirely. Standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on her cane, she didn't just look fragile, she looked resolute. There was a power in her that Clara hadn't seen in ages, and it made Silas's bravado falter. "Mother, you should be in bed." Silas said, his voice dripping with condescension, as though his mother's frailty made her opinions irrelevant. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at Clara. Her eyes were locked firmly on Silas, who suddenly seemed smaller, less sure of himself. I saw the live stream. Eleanor continued her voice, quiet but deadly calm. Beatrice's video. I watched my son force my granddaughter to pay for his vanity project, while his daughter mocked her poverty. The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Clara saw something change in her grandmother's eyes. She wasn't just an old woman beaten down by years of passivity. This was the Eleanor who had built the ranch from nothing, the one who had fought tooth and nail to create a legacy. The silence in the room stretched on as Silas opened his mouth, trying to explain away his actions. But Eleanor didn't let him. "Give me the receipt." "Silas," she said. It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with such finality that no one could question it. For a moment, Clara wondered if Silas would refuse. But the weight of his mother's gaze was too much, and he pulled the receipt from his pocket, handing it over with a tight, reluctant expression. Eleanor's hands, though frail, didn't tremble as she tore the receipt into 4 precise pieces, each one floating to the ground like a symbol of Silas's defeat. "That check is canceled," she stated her words, piercing the heavy silence. "And as of this moment, so is your authority. I am dissolving the family trust, Silas. I am taking back executive control of this ranch, effective immediately." It was as though the floor dropped out from under Silas. The man who had spent years bullying his family, who had built his life on the backs of others, was suddenly reduced to a petulant child caught in his own lies. He sputtered, trying to regain control, but his mother stood firm. "You can't do that," he shouted, his face reddening in anger. But Eleanor didn't flinch. "You haven't run this place," she corrected him, her gaze cold. "You've bled it dry, and you used Clara to hold the bandage." The words hit Clara harder than anything her uncle had ever said. She had spent her life being treated as a tool, as something to be used and discarded. But now, Eleanor was giving her a voice. Eleanor was finally showing up for her, and Clara couldn't believe it. As Eleanor led Clara down the hallway, the weight of the moment seemed to settle over them both. They didn't speak, but Clara could feel the old woman's quiet guilt. Eleanor had watched year after year as Silas and the others used Clara as they manipulated her into paying for their mistakes. She had stayed silent for so long, hoping for a change that never came. But now, faced with the end of her own life and a legacy she'd worked so hard to build, Eleanor realized that silence hadn't protected Clara. It had only allowed the cruelty to grow. When they reached the study, Eleanor's frailty became more apparent. She sank into the chair, her body leaning heavily as if the weight of her regret was too much to bear. "Pour us a drink, Clara," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The good stuff. We're going to need it." Clara did as asked, her hands shaking not from fear but from the sheer force of what had just happened. Her grandmother, the woman who had stood by for so long, had finally taken action. And in doing so, she had changed everything. Eleanor's actions set the stage for what would follow. It was no longer just about surviving the abuse. It was about taking control, about reclaiming what had been stolen, not just from Clara, but from the legacy of her family. Eleanor had finally stopped protecting peace, and in doing so, she gave Clara the strength to fight back. Clara's journey was never meant to be easy, but as the days passed, something shifted inside her. She was no longer the victim of her family's cruelty, no longer the one who quietly took their abuse. She had crossed a threshold, and though the weight of the betrayal still sat heavily on her chest, she felt something stirring within her, a determination, a fire she had never known before. The destruction they had left in their wake was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something new. With her grandmother's intervention, Clara had been handed not just a chance to fight back, but a chance to build something entirely her own. She reclaimed her father's legacy not in the way her family had planned, but in a way that honored him, that honored the woman she was becoming. She founded the Eleanor Veterinary Clinic, a place where she could serve her community on her own terms, a place where she could heal both animals and people. It wasn't just a clinic. It was a symbol of survival, of reclaiming everything that had been stripped from her. Every brick laid, every animal saved, was a small victory over the life that had nearly consumed her. But Clara didn't stop there. She took the pain, the anger, and the lessons from her past and used it to create a future that was better than anything her family had ever offered her. She established a scholarship fund for rural students, kids like herself, full of potential, but without the means to make their dreams a reality. It was more than charity, it was her way of taking what they had used to break her and using it to build something stronger, something that would outlast their lives. For the first time, Clara felt at peace with the land, not as something she was forced to endure, but as something she had a rightful claim to. She had survived the storm, and now, in the quiet after the chaos, she was creating a future that would last. The ranch, the clinic, the scholarship fund, they were her legacy, now not her family's. And with every step forward, Clara wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. Clara's journey wasn't just about escaping the cruelty of her family. It was about discovering who she really was beneath the weight of their expectations. It was about learning that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about finding the strength to create something better from the pieces of your past. Through every trial, Clara found her power, and in doing so, she reclaimed her future. The clinic, the scholarship fund, the land, they weren't just symbols of victory. They were the proof that even in the darkest of times, there's always a way to rise above. Her story reminds us that we all have the strength to overcome the obstacles life throws at us. And sometimes the greatest act of defiance is simply choosing to move forward to build something better, no matter how impossible it may seem. If Clara's journey resonated with you, if you believe in the power of transformation and hope, then consider supporting the content you find meaningful. Like, share and subscribe for more stories that inspire change and show the resilience of the human spirit.